Okay, so we're going to start off the podcast. Welcome, audience, conversationalists, to season two of KTCG. If you guys don't know, KTCG stands for Keep the Conversation Going. And we just basically want to promote good conversation amongst the people, friends, family, and the people that we hold dear to our hearts. And so today the topic is going to be voting is meaningless. And not that it's evidently meaningless, but the people generally feel that our votes don't really matter in the general space. And so to start off, we're going to ask you guys, how do you guys feel when people say voting is pointless or meaningless? And Jibreel can start off since it's going to be alphabetical order. Your last name is J, then it's M, and then when Annie comes in, she'll be the last person to speak.
I bet. No, thank you first off for having me on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited to be on, and shout out to you two for starting up this forum to have some, candid convos.
Thank you. Thank you.
How do I feel when folks tell me voting is meaningless?
Pointless, meaningless. Yeah.
Well, first off, it hurts a little bit because it's like, you know, when I if I'm usually I've like worked on a couple campaigns,
Mm-hmm.
so I've had like run into people, face to face, and they tell me straight up like, that doesn't make a difference, bro. Like, miss me with that, XYZ. But like our government, so we're in a democracy and we elect our representatives, and you vote to get them in. And it just pains me sometimes when folks just completely disengage, um, because there's just so much policing. Commissioners are usually chosen by the mayor, who's an elected rep. Infrastructure, we in NYC, the MTA, if it's running bad, government, funds and controls out our school. The SEEK program came from the state legislature. I wouldn't have been able to get into a school like Baruch and had the support I had if it wasn't for the SEEK program, which the idea was born and brought about, by elected officials. So it's just so much when people think of voting and they tell me it's pointless. I just, it just pains me because I just come from the place that government controls so much, and the way we get folks into government is by voting. And you can't just sit down and have a 2 hour convo and explain to them the entire reason, all the facets of their life that is touched by government. So I just see that it's just a disconnect there, and it takes a long time to get someone from voting is meaningless, voting is pointless, to actually seeing the fruit. So I just feel like that person was failed by society, failed by schooling, failed by their community, to be able to like express something, as like, again, to me, someone who's very involved, painful, is saying like voting don't matter, bro. So that's why I
Definitely.
stand with that.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing. How about you, Danny?
I agree 100%. I used to knock on doors around Manhattan and Queens. I would be there from like I'd be there from like 3 to like 9 p.m. just knocking on doors, and we try to get as much signatures as we can so that we could, go knock on doors another day, and get paid for it, right? And to support like candidates and stuff, right? And you always have those conversations with people that are just like, you know what, like politics has done me dirty, like I don't like it, or you can't respect them, or they're always flip flopping, people are lying and stuff. And I agree with Jibril. It comes from a position of people that have been let down by politics, right? And it's been too frequently and it just keeps like it's like a cycle, right? It keeps coming back and back and back, right? So having these conversations with people, trying to get them to sign petitions or try to get them to be engaged, it will be difficult, right? But it is crazy when you start talking to them and you sit down and you hear their grievances, right? Where they're coming from. Um, and hearing and just telling them, like, hey, government is literally like all over the place and politics is so important, and you have this power, right, to make the person that you elect, make them work for you, right? And I believe that that source of empowerment is something that we completely forget, right? Just because of the cycle that just keeps repeating and repeating, we lose how much power we actually have, and that again is something that is structural, right? It's supposed to be that way, right? So that elected officials could do essentially, I wouldn't say what they want to do, but essentially, run with things with less tension, right? But then, of course, there's like community partnerships and stuff like that, right? But um, I do believe every time I hear that, knocking on doors, talking to family members, I try to like, take it from a standpoint of like, where are they coming from, right? And how can we solve where they're coming from, right? Or how can we solve the issues that they wanna address? Why can't we make that pressing?
I was just saying that I definitely agree with both of you. I don't think I understood how important voting was, like truly important, until I became an educator. Um, because there's a lot of wishy-washy stuff in the education system, and most of it is linked to our elected officials and who decide, the Secretary of Education, who decides exactly what is going to be funded and things of that nature. So thank you both for sharing that. So on to the next question, unless Hamed, you have something to share. You're good? Okay, perfect. So despite current events and the state of the world, what makes you continue to vote? Jibreel, you can start us off.
So we gotta stay in alphabetical. Okay. I feel like it's because of everything that's happening in the world is why I stay engaged and why I continue to vote and why I continue to try to get people involved. We just went through and we're still going through a once in a century pandemic. And, coming out of this to have a just recovery for, Black and brown communities, for like vulnerable communities, you have to stay involved. Whether it's trying to, dispel myths about the vaccine or trying to make sure, there's, adequate support for folks who may be in danger of getting evicted, for folks who are, locked up behind bars, who feel like they don't have a voice, feel like they don't have, anyone to advocate for them. That's something, I work in the public advocate office, citywide elected official. That's something we was also doing at the very early on in the pandemic, advocating for folks who, are involved in our justice system, advocating for folks who may be um, at risk of being evicted. I think you go the other way when you're in crisis. That's the time to really get more involved, to really start asking the questions of why is it like this? Why, after the pandemic, the rich got richer, and folks who were struggling still are. I think in times of crisis, in times of like challenge and strife, I usually find that it's flipped the other way. People don't disengage more. I find that folks ask more questions. People in my community know me as being very involved. During the pandemic, I spoke to a lot of people, and coming out of it, more and more folks are reaching out. How can I get involved? How can I get the assistance that's coming out? Well, I'm saying one more thing before, I kick it over to Danny. Also the PPP loans. That was something that was huge. I was coming in, and we seen like the first, couple weeks I was out, the Lakers got it. Some other big orgs was like, wait, what's going on here? Like, it's not meant for them. But like that's an example of folks just not being involved. Small businesses not having the access, not having the channels to figure out cumbersome bureaucratic applications. And that's where city government comes in, state government comes in, or is supposed to come in and assist. So I actually don't accept that premise. When things get worse, that's even more incentive to get involved and make sure resources that are going out get to where they need to go.
Definitely.
No, I totally agree with you, bro. It literally comes down to that, and I feel like now with everything coming up and everything internationally, nationally, within the city, I think the biggest thing I actually like think about when I go out to vote and what's driving me to go vote is seeing what solutions they have. Right? We have the problems. We have communities that are dealing with different problems. Right? Now, how do we find candidates, right, or elected officials that will bring their promise, right? Not give empty promises just to be like, yeah, I'm gonna fix this or yeah, I'm gonna fix that. But tell me exactly what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it, and tell me it's gonna help my community out, right? Tell me it's gonna help out every community out, right? It's not specifically the people, yeah, people that are well positioned, but also people that are not well positioned, right? I reach out to people that aren't easy to access, right? Specifically with language, specifically with educational levels, right? How do we get them to be also part of the solution, right? And how do we get them more well off now, especially now with the time of the pandemic and with everything, I guess, just getting worse essentially. How do we move forward, right? And I think that has been like something that specifically has moved me to become or to continue voting, right?
I definitely appreciate both of you guys' answer because during when COVID started, there was like this bleak outlook that I'm receiving from the public and media, and it definitely affected my like outwardly, I want to say perspective, and I just didn't feel motivated to continue to like go out there and be civically engaged, especially since I felt like I wasn't feeling a part of the community anymore since everybody would had to like socially distance and stuff like that. And I think a big hit was the sense of community that you can just go outside and see your community out there. Everybody's engaged, they're doing what they have to do. Like New York was just flowing as it always usually did. So that stop definitely made me reflect more on like what I really valued and like how things in this world truly operate. So definitely bring giving me a different perspective with the answers you guys gave. And if you guys have nothing else to add, we can move on to the next question. Do you have any ideas in making politics more engaging for veteran voters? And to supplement that, how can we, I guess, find a different way to deliver the pitch for voting to first time voters? So, one end of the question is make politics and voting more engaging for veteran voters. And how do we continue to convince first time voters that voting is important and should be practiced? Jibreel.
Thank you. That's a great question. I would say, folks who are, already built that habit of getting engaged. Um, the funny thing is you kind of have to stay engaged because, one of the reasons of voting is again to try to get your values, your ideals, into government so that can be acted out. Um, I'm pretty sure there's no one in the world who would argue that we live in a perfect society. So there's a lot to still fight for. So I'm really not as concerned as those folks, or I don't have quite a good answer for folks who've kind of built that habit of voting. Because one thing about voting, it kind of rolls into other things in life. If you're voting, you kind of have to be informed of who you're voting for, and if you're doing research about who's running and whatnot, you kind of know about the issues, and if you know about the issues, you're going to continue to fight for the issues, which kind of lead back to voting the right people in. So it's kind of like cyclical. If you build that habit, my hope is that like you're in the fight, you're in the movement. You just got to keep going to fight for that ideal world, or whatever you think that is. In terms of the folks who aren't involved, or haven't casted their first ballot, or aren't even registered, what I find is like making it real. When I'm out there, knocking doors or doing voter registration drive, say I'm out here in Canarsie, like trying to get, people registered by a park. I'm saying, this park right here, local electeds decide how to build it up. So you see, like we have, one example, we have Canarsie Park. It's like a huge field with like, 4 baseball fields and only like one court. And a lot of people play ball. And as the demographics in Canarsie changed, it was like 60s, 70s, it was like Italian and whatnot. Now it's predominantly like Caribbean Black, and folks like to ball. And I just tell them straight up, like, this isn't just decided by some random entity how this park look. You can actually have a say in how this park is upkept, how this park is redesigned going forward. And that's through your elected officials, that's through getting involved, that's through voting. And that alone, that perks them up. Say, oh really, like we can decide how. I start to tell them about community boards and whatnot, and that kind of like gets the conversation going, get them more involved. So for the folks who aren't as involved or haven't voted yet, I just try to give them examples of how to make it real, how to draw it back to their day-to-day lives, whether it's the L train not running right, or whether it's like the park not being kept right. I think just tying it to their real day-to-day lives and taking it out the abstracts, and you can create change through voting. I think that helps a lot.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing, Jibreel. Danny?
Yeah, I mean, great questions. It's definitely not a silver bullet, right? It's not something that you could just be like, oh yeah, like I don't know, do something and everyone's going to start voting, right? Or everyone's going to continue to vote, right? I think for veteran voters, I think, and I feel like once you're in politics, like once you're looking at like the things like that go on in the political world, you're kind of just involved and you're going to keep voting and voting and voting, but also trying to find different ways to create these lower levels, or not lower, but more of like these local levels, right? of specifically how do people get more engaged, right? More accessibility to people's community boards, right? More accessibility to beautification projects, more accessibility to transportation projects within the area, making sure that people are able to get in contact with these city agencies, right? There's a crack on my sidewalk, there's an uneven thing, there's a tree that's been down for weeks, that kind of thing, right? Making sure that the veteran voters know that they're able to get in contact, right? And this should be available for everybody, right? Anybody that wants to get started, maybe new or been in the game for a long time, right? But politics is interesting, like once you're in it, like it starts becoming more of like who has the tea, like, oh, this person said this person said that, oh, the Twitter and then this and the third, so it gets interesting when it comes down to that. But definitely just like find different ways where people get more engaged, right, in the local level, right, with parks, with sidewalk, with catch basins, right, all that, they're very important and they do make a difference, right, in just one in their local area, right. But just continuing that type of engagement, that's key, right, to make sure that they know that their voice is being heard and they know that they have a place, right, to voice their opinion, and that will amplify it as well, right. And I guess for like the newer, like people that are not registered to vote, people that are kind of iffy on it, like technology. I'm always in awe with like these websites that kind of like split everything up into like different type of specific areas, right? They're like, oh, like who controls the budget? And then they show you like this interactive. It's like normally used by like educators, right? And do you know what I'm talking about specifically? Like there's like these different type of like websites where like you could like play around with this, and then this something else happens, and it's like, oh, like it's like you click in a park, it's like, who controls this park? Oh, parks the department, whatever, right? But something along those lines. I feel like if we have technology in our hands, like why aren't we using that more, right? Why aren't we using that to open up levels of like accessibility of languages, right? Why aren't we putting this in every senior center? Why aren't we putting this in every recreational center? Why aren't we putting this in every why aren't we putting this in community boards and schools and churches and religious institutions? Like why aren't we spreading this more? Right? If we have the technology, why aren't we using it, right, to our advantage? And I feel like technology would be an easy way to actually show people like, hey, look how much of your life is controlled by voting, right? And look how scary it is that only 27%, I believe, or was the last number that I saw, that was the mayoral election, right? Only 27% of the people are actually deciding this, like how scary is that, right? That's just like putting in their face. Like if we have technology, why aren't we using it?
That's a great point, Danny. Whatever everything you just said, it reminded me of my business economics class, and we had to create an application that was an app, but our idea was to basically find it really acceptable for like first time voters to know who their campaign runners are. So it would be an app that had like a list of, okay, these are the people who are running in this specific race. Here's all of their ideas. Here's all the things that are against. And that app was geared to like make people more informed of who they're voting for. And then if the government would allow it or the city would allow it, it can be a good way to like vote over the phone. I know there's like security issues about voting over like the internet and stuff like that, but you definitely bring up a good point as to why we're not trying to find a more accessible way through technology to civically engage our citizens. So Jamise can push us to the next question.
Yeah, of course. Thank you both for sharing. So, what are some ways we can reach out to elected officials to voice our demands? The supplemental parts are, what difference should we expect it to make? And how can we hold elected officials or representatives accountable?
Got it. No, that's great questions. Well, there's one website that I use, my.gov.nyc.org, and maybe we can put that like in the show notes or wherever. It's a website where I'm probably sure Daddy knows about it. It's a website where you just put in your address, and it literally shows you all your reps from the local level, your city council member, all the way up to your U.S. senator. So that's one way you can find out. And then they have what's also cool about it. They have all the addresses for each of their offices and all the phone numbers for those offices. So that's one tool, mygovnyc.org, that you can go to. Just pop in your address, and you'll get to have the contact information, and you'll get to know who represents you at every level of city government. The second part is how can we hold them accountable? If I got it right. Well, reaching out. I find so I've had the blessing to work at all three levels of government. I interned in city council. I went to Albany for a semester, and I was in DC
Cool.
for two summers. Yeah. No, super blessed. And what surprised me is like the different levels of engagement. So in Congress, there was actually spikes where the phones would like ring off the hook. Sadly, I think like it was my second week, and there was a mass shooting in Orlando, at like a nightclub. Yeah, it was like my second week,
Oh,
and
I
the
remember.
phones was
Yeah.
ringing
Yeah.
off the hook. Like literally, as soon as you hang up, it would just start ringing again, and that's like folks was just activated, and it was pushing really hard to get an assault rifle ban. And it's only certain pressure points like that. I'm pretty sure during the George Floyd protest, which YouTube shared, it's kind of like the genesis of this podcast. I'm pretty sure lines that on Capitol Hill was like ringing off the hook. But apart from those spikes, when I was in the state assembly, that it would be like almost no phones ringing, no one reaching out to the office. And those things make a difference. Like 10 calls a day on one issue, literally 10 calls. If you get 10 people on your block to call about one issue, one law, one bill in the state legislature, it's gonna actually make it to the member more times than not because there isn't that much activity. There are spikes sometimes when the budget is coming close. That would be like around April for the state assembly. But throughout the course of the year, folks actually don't really call out and reach out to the elected official. In my personal experience,
Yeah.
so that's like one big way. Of course, email, of course, but to a lesser extent, I would recommend if you want to get a particular proposal or bill passed, I would try to work through organizations because then that's when you're able to coalesce and bring more energy and voice together than reaching out to one person. But if you can get a phone campaign or calling campaign going with folks on your block, folks even across the city, depending like if it's student debt or XYZ, calling your local electeds, it actually goes a long way. So I really push folks to call. Right now, it's Delta is still crazy. So I wouldn't recommend really, going out and meeting them just yet. Offices are just starting to open. But phone calls and Twitter too. Twitter is also a big, angle where, some electors that are very responsive, getting a Twitter storm going, atting them straight, straight up. Like DMs, maybe not much because it's not public, but, like atting them straight up, like, hey, I've called your office, I reached out and I don't see anything, like, and just staying persistent on it. Yeah, more times than not, they don't like that. And they're trying to
Awesome.
Okay.
a couple of ways.
How about you, Danny?
All right, Danny.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jibreel. I mean, organizations, man, like just reach out to the organizations, talk to them, express your plan, your project, the bill you're supporting, and you'll see it going a long way. There are people that are devoted and dedicating right now a lot of hours to push these bills and push these projects, right? And if they do have the connections to put you, to make sure that goal you want to reach is met, right? Another thing I would say, just go to their office. I was I was a constituent liaison for quite a while, and honestly, like a big thing where they would just come to the office and bring like a pack of papers and be like, look, I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this, that, there, this, here, this record, that record, and they'd be like, look, we want you to do something, and I'd be like, okay, and with everything just being given at you, and this is more, of course, at the local level, right? But with everything being issued at you, you're like, okay, I could, get in conversation with, if I need to get from a different department or a specific area, or, maybe it's not my case, we could refer you to the other elected officials that can help you, right? But, going to the office is huge, right? Of course, COVID's happening right now, but, calling their office, writing letters to the office, anything that you're able to like keep like a record, right, of when you're reaching out, right? Also, when you reach out to 311, 311 is also huge, right? A huge way to kind of like voice your opinion, and they do get the records, right? But also like continuing to like have like a paper trail of when you reach out, how you reach out, right? I think that's one way of keeping them accountable, aside from the big one, which is voting. Um, but also a way to get in contact with your elected official to make sure that things get passed.
Yeah, that that honestly reminded me of when I interned at the Borgen Project, and they had us calling and handwriting letters to the president and our local elected officials, and I was just like, yeah. And there was one part where obviously they wanted us to go in, and we had the option of going in to actually see the officials. Obviously I was too shy and I was too nervous. So I was like, I'm not doing that. I'd rather just call, tell you that I want this bill passed, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, I definitely agree with those two options, calling and definitely like walking in because your presence is important too. So definitely.
Yeah, and if I could add one more, that's like the diplomatic ways of going about it. There are some issues which, depending how intense the issue is. I don't know if folks want to get too controversial, but like defund the police, something like that. There's something like this that stay away from it completely. Another way, if the diplomatic ways don't work, trying to go and counter protesting some of their events is one surefire way. If you're continually pushing for a bill or to get a council member or elected official that represents you to respond to something, if those diplomatic ways don't work, you can definitely go the more militant route, tracking them on social media, because they do usually share ahead of time where they're going to be. And because I like work in a public advocate office, so I know some of the guerrilla warfare type stuff to get elected. Not upset, but like you got to have them feel some discomfort sometime if it's like a really serious issue. If it's the things Danny and I are talking about, like getting the park renovated, making trains run on time, that's all cool. But say you was, brutalized by NYPD or, disrespected in some way, sometimes, they try to avoid, unfortunately, issues like that, or try and be responsive because it's not pretty. But you can also like, watch, what they're doing on, Twitter, social media, where they're going to be at, and trying to go and meet them, in person and confront them, because it doesn't always make it up to them. Sometimes it just doesn't get to them. Either their staff doesn't deem it as important, or you're just, that constant constituent. But, staying persistent and going to trying to meet them in person at, events, depending on the issue, depending how, most times I wouldn't want to come to that, but that's also a option for our more militant listeners of KTCG.
Right,
I can't tell you the amount of
that.
times. Sorry. I
No,
can't
go ahead.
tell times where you see like one constituent in every single event. And it's like they're like kind of like a shadow, right? Like you go and then there's like whoa, you're here, and then like in the next hour, like, oh my god, you're here again, and like you see them over and over again. But the elected official talks to them, and it's like like what? Let me see what's your issue and like what's happening here, and sees, or at least gives them like a sense of direction of where else the case could go, right?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. If you guys are good, nothing else to add? Okay. So we can move on to the next question. Are there any misbeliefs that the public holds about the political field? And what are we perceiving wrong? Jibreel, please start.
Misbeliefs. That's a good one. I think, first off, just believing that you have to, organize a huge march or go on a 40-day hunger strike, or, you have to do grand things to make a change. I think that's like one thing when I speak to folks is like their sense of making a change is straight to, 100. They go 0 to 100. Like, I'm gonna go and protest, disregard what I just said about like going and, tracking the member down and counter protesting. But I just find, a misbelief of like making change. You can really start small and make a big impact just by, starting small, organizing people on your block, going to, a local community board meeting, like taking small baby steps. I find more times than not, people like fail to like start something, like they have a big idea. And that's why, I want to, hats off to you two for starting this podcast. Cause, there's a lot of things, I'm sure a lot of people have like grand ideas after what happened, with the George Floyd protest, but the amount of people that actually started that project or initiative, is less than the people that actually like, really felt, some
Thank
type of
you.
way about that, and
Thank you for that.
wanted to take an initiative. This is like one way of making a change, getting out information, bringing folks together for candid conversation. So I just think like, and not that this is considered small, this is big. A podcast is like, it takes a lot of commitment. I'm sure like scheduling, all that. So it's big. So this is like on the higher bar end of things. But I'm just talking like, you know, getting people together, even in your friends group that doesn't normally talk about, politics or laws or whatnot. Something wrong with your own way, or you see something on the news or something across your feed, like, setting up a conversation with your homies to talk about it. Like going to elected, um, as Jimmy said earlier, it's kind of like nerve wracking. Like, I'm gonna go and speak to the Congress member. Like, nah, I'm good. But like, speaking to people at your church or your masjid or synagogue or something, just about the issues that is affecting you. I think that's like one big, misbelief. People just, read about, Martin Luther King or like Harriet Tubman or all these great figures, and they think, I gotta go and get down ASAP to make a change. Where, there's a lot more, folks that are involved. I can talk to about like Night Tennis Association leaders who never get in the press, but they just make a real true impact, in the community, in their development. So that's like one thing I just wish, people would just drop, that you have to do something grand or big or, something, militant to be considered an activist, to be considered, making change. So that's one thing. And I wish I can just get that through people's head. There's so many ways you can start to affect change, just by, starting, with simple, steps.
Got you. So no, like you don't need another Martin Luther King, is what you're saying. You can just be you and see change. Got you. Okay. I mean, definitely. I feel like. Sorry, I know Danny, you're about to go. I just want to say that that's a good point, because I feel as if, even personally, I'm at fault with that. Like, I feel like something always has to be grand, or I have to be fully committed. Like, I feel bad if I'm not a part of a protest, or like I'm not finding a great way to get my voice out to the general masses. But thank you for reassuring us that the little steps count as well. That's really important. Danny, you can go.
A misbelief that I have, right? Specifically, well, not belief specifically that I have, but something that I've heard normally is, that the elected official doesn't work for, the public, or, they're like, we have no control over the elected official, right? And I think that's a huge one, right? That's another one that's like, you have the ability to, like push someone in your community to run, right? Make them run, make an issue, raise awareness on an issue, right? You could make someone run. One, you could vote, right? Vote them out of office. Two, you could go and meet them in their office. You could do, what Jibreel said, show up in their office, protest, rally, all those kind of things, right? Like, I feel like people, once we get over the fact that, that once people start learning that they have so much power in their hands to kind of mobilize and shape politics into a whole different thing, that's when we will start seeing more of a change, right, within our political structure, right? Once people start believing that, that they could run, and once we start opening that accessibility to that, anyone could run, right? Everyone and anyone can run. And why aren't you running if you have your strong beliefs and an issue should be changed and has not been changed yet in your community? Making sure that people know that, it would open up a whole different slate of candidates, right? And I feel like we're starting to see this, right, with AOC's run, with the DSA, with different other parties that are running as well. We start seeing a different type of candidate that's been standing up. It's not the, oh, I'm a lawyer and I'm this, or oh, I'm, I ran for office my whole life and now I'm running to be your council member, or I'm running for my whole life and now I'm going to be your senator or something like that, like we start seeing a different type of person that's running, and that's so important, right? But how do we get to that point is to make sure that we are pushing the fact that it's not hard to run and you could run, right? And it goes back to, moving it back to like organizations, right? And it goes back to empowering, communities, right? It goes back to empowering issues, right? Making sure that issues are heard and being resolved. right? So I believe that once we step over that once people start knowing how much power they have, then we'll start seeing a lot more interaction within politics than we're seeing right now.
And Danny, you bring up the point of like anyone can run. How do we not have the Kanyes of the world and the Trumps of the world not believe that they can run as well? Or do you still promote that idea?
Look, anybody could run. If Kanye wants to run president, he could run for president, right? Now, I'm not endorsing Kanye, right? I'm not saying Kanye's gonna win, right? But if he wants to run, he can run. It'd make Twitter more interesting. People would be more engaged. But yeah, we have to open it up, right? Anybody could run, right? And I know that opens up for a lot of people to run, right? It opens up the board, like anybody could run, right? But it just has to be like that, right? It just has to be an open slate, right? And I guess it comes down to like then voting, right? It comes down to voting and being like, look, now I have the power to choose, right? Who do I want, Kanye or Donald Trump, right? Hopefully it doesn't go down to that line, but it comes down to the power of voting, right? And it brings us back to our issue one, like how do we get people more engaged in voting, right? If more people are running, that means more communities are being heard, right? Or I assume that more communities are being heard, and then that could mean that more issues are being discussed, and then at least a little more engagement along those lines, right? But it brings us back down to the question of that we have to answer before even moving on to any type of political structure or political like revamping the system or changing the elections, right? It's how do we get people engaged initially as voters, right? How do we get them the baseline engaged?
All right, thank you for sharing. I just wanted to make sure that there was a boundary for him. But I see your idea of like just having fresh blood is important as well, not just somebody who knows how to manipulate the system in our minds. But yeah, make a good point. So with that, I think, yeah, Gemise, it's your turn to ask the question.
You're too much. So the next question is, can political leaders truly represent everyone? And do politicians genuinely care about us?
So that's a really interesting question, because the answer there for me personally is like it depends on the second question. The first question of can elected officials represent everyone? In the sense they're elected to represent the whole district, but there is conflicting views. So, to truly represent everyone, it'd have to take a lot of compromise. And just given how, heated our, political, environment is right now, there isn't much, space for compromise. It's like the other side is evil, the other side is corrupt, the other side stole the election, XYZ. So there's not much room for that. So in theory, yes, they are supposed to represent, everyone. When you get to the national level, it is harder. Because then you're dealing with much more complex, broad national issues like how should healthcare be set up? Should it be public? Should it be private? Military? How should we use the military and America's might, the imperial system, the imperial nation that we live in? There's just so much complex issues at the national level. It is virtually impossible to truly represent everyone because everyone across the nation just so much different experiences. I don't want to put a judgment right or wrong, but just me growing up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, very different from the views I'd imagine someone growing up in like Utah or some other like rural area with just like different lived here for generations. I'm a son of immigrants, so just so much conflicting views and experiences is really hard. At the local level, I think it is possible because you're more dealing with the day-to-day, how to run a train system well, education is another like very charged issue. Even when it comes to mass, there's a like a lot of folks who are back and forth. I'm not vaccinating my child, I ain't putting that in my child, and they don't gotta wear a mask, So it's really hard. And that question, I think it comes down to compromise, but I don't believe an elected can truly and have everyone be happy, like represent every single person. And what was it, the second one again?
Yeah, the second part was, do politicians genuinely care about us?
No, I'm gonna keep that one short. Now we stop. So that one, so genuinely care about us. That's such a loaded question because it's like, who's the us? Is the us, young folks who are, trying to get other people more involved in the political process? Is the us, the larger electorate? I just think that question is so loaded. It's hard to, answer on the dime, but the word genuine is very interested. I think, more times than not, self-interest comes in and plays a role. They have a job to do, they have a job to keep. And they're usually more responsive to the donors, to the people who actually vote. So there is some discrepancy there in who they actually care about. If there's folks in a part of the district who aren't voting, because you get to see this, data once they win an election, once folks run an election, you get to see nearly, block by block type data of like who came out to vote, who came out to support. And, just in terms of self-interest, just in terms of who came out and support you, you're going to be more, there's a tendency there to be more responsive to those peoples, to those groups. Say I'm representing a certain block association, I see the numbers came out heavily for me. If if that block association president calls me up, I'm gonna be more responsive because I know those people support me. Those people support, what I believe in, whatnot. So in terms of genuinely caring, they genuinely care who votes them in, I would think. And the people who donate to their campaigns. I wouldn't say everybody, but it's hard to say. It also depends who the politician is. And some of them are really good at portraying that, but actually making, a lot of, bad backroom deals and all that. I ain't here to share too much tea, but you'd be surprised. Politicians are good at playing that game of acting like they do care.
Thank you for that, Jibreel. Danny?
No, yeah, I definitely agree with the second question that Jibril just answered. I mean, like, it's just, it comes down to, well, I'm not a politician, so I wouldn't be able to truthfully answer this question, right, and genuinely answer the question. But it depends on who you ask and where in their, I guess, where in their administration you ask. Like when, like, is it like election season coming up? Did they just get voted in? Like, it depends, right? There's a lot of factors in that one. And it's a very, very loaded question, but it depends on who you ask, when you ask them, or you ask them, right? So that it depends, right, for that question. But I guess for like the first question, right, I would say no as well. I honestly do not believe that an elected official could truly represent their whole area, either on the local level, even 100% not on the federal level, right? Just because there's a lot of different views, right? A lot of different views being thrown around and stuff, and a lot of people that don't have the sentiment. And then it goes back to like being how like polarized it is, right? And then like how different it is being like Republican versus Democrat, and then you have the other parties as well that take place in it, right? And then there's within even one's party, there's even splits, right? There's people that are a little more progressive, people that are a little bit more moderate, people that are centrist, and then you go to like the Republican side where you got people that are more right wing, right? And then there's people that are more, I guess like centrist or like more in the middle, right? In each section. So I truly don't believe, even if the whole district was, say, like Democratic, I believe, or like the whole district was filled with Democrat voters, I don't believe that they could even truly represent even a district in that. There's just too many views and too many things, even on the local level, when it comes down to schools, when it comes down to budgets, when it comes down to trains. It's like, we're going to put a bus stop here. Why here? Why not that block? Like, we're going to put a bike lane here. Why this block? Why not the next block? Why are we going to put a stop sign here? Why this block? Why next block? Like, why are we putting this business and not that business? And it's like, they're there to, elected officials are there to mediate. They're there to make sure that, people get to a compromise for the well-being of their district, right? But I guess there's 100% just differing views, right? Things that we think that are small, but it's something as big as a business, or something as big as the school where their children work and no work, sorry, where their children go to school and stuff. I think even if it was a completely one-party district, they would still be in a lot of conflict where the elected official would not truly represent everyone in every single decision that they make.
All right, Danny, thank you for sharing. I mean, your comments made me think about what's it called, the Albany Caucus, and how we got to meet a few elected officials. And I think we asked one individual of African American descent about, like, I think it was about Sikh or how they can improve our situation at the time, about I think budget or like approved budget and stuff like that. So one individual was African American and the other individual was of, I think, Asian descent. And it was, you can see amongst us in the crowd who had the better answer and who was trying to like beat around the bush. So it looks like there's a lot of conniving people in this space. But we can move on to the next question, which is, what do political leaders factor in when creating or advocating for legislation?
Yeah, I can like do that in bullet form and then kick it off to Danny. For the first thing is first, is this gonna upset my constituents? Depending on, like, is this gonna upset the people in my district? Is this gonna upset the people who vote for me? And that question also depends on who the elected official is. If you're president, you care less about necessarily like constituent issues or whatnot. You're thinking about like national security, XYZ. If you're governor, you're thinking even less so. Mayor more, because the mayor is more accountable to the people and whatnot. So number one, I would say like constituent, especially if you're like a city council member, a state assembly member. The first thing is like, is this gonna upset the people in my neighborhood, the people in my desert? Where do they stand on this issue? Whether it's bringing homeless shelters into the community, or whether it's again like defunding the police, which a lot of people was just really really hot. Just depending on the issue, the first thing I find, or one of the top considerations is just going to set the people who I was elected to come in and represent. Next, I would say is if this piece of legislation or this policy has like budget implications, how are we going to pay for this? Are we going to have to raise taxes? Like, how are we going to pay for X or Y policy? If we want to cancel student debt, how is that going? How are we going to offset and make sure the banks don't come in and fund someone that's going to run against me? Like, oh, Jibreel voted to abolish student debt. Sally Mae coming for me donated 100 million to my opponent. So that's like, how are you going to pay for it? And then I would say, lastly, not lastly, but another like, top of the priority when they're deciding legislation is, like what may be the unconsidered consequences, what may be some indirect effects of this piece of policy. Because once you decide, one thing, resources are limited. We live in a society where resources are limited. I think it's always smart for an elected official, I would hope they would ask, what are the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation? If we're gonna make sure that there's no remote, like one example, no remote option in schools this year, which is one of the policy that the mayor is pushing for. We got to make sure for folks, if there is a scared case, like how do you make sure folks are, still engaged, so they can come to class? Folks that can't find, parents that have to go to work that can't, find someone to take care of the kid at home, making sure that there is some sort of option for them, if they need childcare issues or whatnot. I don't want to get deep into the weeds, but just, is this going to upset my constituents? How are we going to pay for this? And what are some of the unintended, consequences of this decision?
Thank you. Danny?
I agree with Jibreel 100%. I feel like it just goes on those points, right? It goes down to who am I going to upset? It goes down to how much is it going to cost, and it goes down to, and I do believe that it goes down to another thing as well. It goes down to, what I ran on, right? And how closer does that push me to accomplish what I ran on, right? Or it comes down to, will it pass easy or will it take time to pass, right? Some politicians go and they're like, let me just fix something quick, quick, quick. So then when election time comes, I could show that I have shown maybe a lot of things, but they're like simple tasks, right? So it really depends on like when in the season, or like how close is election season, right? That's coming, right? Because there's always these like low hanging fruit that one could take, right? One could pick, right? That really won't upset nobody because it's like something very simple, or something that they could put on their like little ballot. I don't know if you guys seen it. They have like these little ballots, like they're like picture, and it's like, my name is blah, and then I did this and that and the third, and it's always like something vague. It's like I don't know, like I put a stop sign here, and it's like I put I gave kids lunch here, or like, oh, I brought these people here, it's like there's little things, right? So I feel like it comes down to really that, right? I forgot what they're called, Jibreel. Do you remember what they were called? Like we used to give them out during like canvassing, when we'd canvass, like
Like
little
pamphlets.
like pamphlets, but there's a different name for it. There's like they're little pamphlets.
Lit. Usually we just
Oh,
call it.
lit. Okay. It's
Yeah.
called lit. Yeah. So they usually get like 50 of them. It's like just like packs of like lit, right? They're just knocking, you leave one in every door and stuff. But I believe it depends on when you ask, right? When you ask the elected official, like what's going through your mind. I feel like when election season is coming, they start getting a little more productive, especially if they haven't been able to meet a lot of their goals that they set for their 2 years or 4 years, right? Um, so it really depends on when you ask.
And
But
just for the non-politicals, lit is just short for literature.
Gotcha.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, it's really cool though. I
Lit.
think
Oh, it's
That was
lit.
like lit.
Like
No,
it's lit. Okay.
they get creative too. They get really creative. They have all these nicknames and stuff. Like it's called like GOTV, and I was like, what the fuck is GOTV? I don't know if but like, what's GOTV? And it's like, get out the vote, and that's how simple it is, right? Literally, that's all it is. And I was like, wow, I thought it was like something else,
Yeah.
But I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. It's your turn, Jimmy.
Thank you guys for sharing. Our next question is, what resources can citizens use to stay updated about candidates and upcoming campaigns? This is specifically for like when a election is about to happen. We want to know what they're supporting, what they're not supporting, just getting that nice resource and information so we know who to vote for.
Well informed.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always going first. I feel like I'm taking some of the answers away.
Oh no, I mean, if you can literally give it to Danny if you don't want to share soon. So we just wanted to go in that order, so it's faster for people.
Got it. I'm gonna kick this to Danny because I feel like Danny is like, Jibreel, take that ass.
Gotcha.
I would say just like, when election season is coming up, a lot of organizations will start, portraying or showing what candidates they're endorsing, going to the candidate's website, making sure you read their background, making sure you read what they're promising, making sure to read what their goals are, for the district that they're going to represent or the district they're running for, right? And just so like try to compare, right? Compare the goals, right? See what's realistic and see what's not realistic, right? And really envision, is this the best solution for my community or for my district, right? Well, is this going to be, of course, in politics, there's no like silver bullet, right? There's nothing that like, oh yeah, like I'm going to change this and then everything is going to change, right? But, are we pushing in the right direction with this candidate, right? There's an organization that I used to work with, I used to intern with, and their name was Common Cause, right? Common Cause New York. And they do a lot of information. They have their own like website, and they come out with a lot of like portfolios and stuff of candidates specifically that are running. And this organization is an organization that does not affiliate with a specific political party. So everything they say is pretty neutral, right? They try to get people out to vote in a neutral base so that the voter could decide upon themselves what party that they want to decide to affiliate themselves with, right? But specifically, just getting in contact with organizations, right? Getting in contact with, canvassers as well. Time of election, I think I'd give an award to anybody who has been able to avoid being, stopped on the street and talked about the election. I'd give an award for anybody who has been able to dodge, and I used to like knock on people's door. If you could dodge me, I'd wait outside your house and just be like, are you ready to vote? Like, when are you voting? What time are you voting? How are you getting there? All these questions are asked, it's like a whole interrogation. But, like, honestly, the opportunity presents themselves, take it, right? But also know that every elected official is going to try to charm you, right? They're going to try to give you a sweet story. They're going to try to tell you, yeah, this, that, and the third, support my cause because I'm going to change the world, right? Everyone's going to want to change the world, right? But what are they doing? What steps are they taking to push the district, the community into that area, right? Of course, there's specifically the voting organizations. There's other organizations that are a little more focused on issues, right? So just seeing like the community organizations and seeing where your issues lie, and seeing the candidates they support is another way to really see, kind of get more information on the candidate that you might want to support in your election.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I would also say, there's a couple, news organizations that are usually good in terms of New York State, New York City politics. Of course, Danny, everyone, in the political world always, says city and state, which is big. If there's any local or state, election, usually when there's a national election, there are, more times than not, national media, you'll see them on town halls on CNN, you see them on the New York Times, all those, well-known entities. But if it's like state and local, I would recommend folks check out City and State, which again is a news organization that covers state and local politics. There's this other org called Gotham Gazette, which is really focused on the localized issues. Politico, which is another news outlet. They're usually good with tracking local elections and state level elections. And I think with those three, that's a good start. Depending if it's like in your district, there's also like hyper local outlets, because like where I'm at in Canarsie, we have the Canarsie Courier. They have like the Queen's Eagle. There's some very localized, depending on the area that you're in. Like city council races, they don't really get covered a lot, but no, I would always check your hyper local outlets, and happy folks can reach out to me. You can put my email or my work email in the show notes, or my personal email rather in the show notes, and I can help people figure that stuff out. But yeah, City and State, Gotham Gazette, and Politico, I think those three you could kind of use if you're trying to figure out info on races in your hood.
Thank you.
I'd add one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
I forgot what it was called, but New York City Votes, during the time of elections, they normally put out these videos where it kind of gives them like a minute or 2 minute, like with a candidate, and asking them specific questions on issues that specific questions on their platform, like what are they running on, what they want to accomplish, and all that kind of stuff. And it's very like, I don't know about you guys, but I love like short videos that give me all the information I need to get in the shortest amount of time, so this really does it really well, I believe. And just also seeing what the Board of Election has, right? They have outlets that present to you different forms of getting information when upcoming elections are being presented. Just like the NYC Campaign Finance Board as well. All those are different outlets for you just to like get on, and if you like short videos like I do, this the New York City Votes is definitely good too.
And one last one, podcasts are big too. The FAQ NYC is one podcast that is like some veteran local journalists in New York, so that's a big one. There's another one called Max Politics. Max Politics, that's another good one for like candidate specific information. They'll bring them on to speak. And the last one I'll say, the Brian Lair Show. He doesn't always do candidates, but
Yeah.
during election cycles, he'll do like the big ones, the comptroller,
Oh,
the
okay.
mayor's race. So if you're looking for like city councilman, he might not have them on.
Mhm.
But Brian Lear usually does a good job of like, borough president races,
Mhm.
comptroller races, public advocate races. He'll have
Oh,
them.
that's fire. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe when y'all
You might
get
do a collab.
bigger and whatnot. Facts.
Definitely. If you guys got nothing else to add, you good? All right, we can move on to the next one. Let's see here. All right, so ranked choice voting was implemented this year. How does that work for the people that don't really know what's going on? Anybody can start. If you want to let Danny go, you can.
I could jump in on this one at first. So that one, yeah, that's at the city level. It doesn't affect state races, doesn't affect the DA races, and doesn't affect Congress. But that was a good question, and that kind of led to bolsters and kind of Danny's argument of more people should be allowed to run, and it incentivizes more people to run because you don't necessarily have to be someone's first choice. You can try to build a broader coalitions of twos and threes, and your particular ones to have a route to victory. But it is difficult. There was some districts with like 9 people running, 10 people running in one area, and it's like, how am I supposed to decipher all these folks? Usually the strong candidates will move towards the front by garnering endorsements through garnering donations or whatnot. But the short answer, it is really hard to decipher when you have a lot of folks running in your community, and there's multiple races. There's a mayor race this year, comptroller race. There's just so much going on in the political arena. And I can't imagine what it was like for like a first time voter, someone just learned to vote. You flip your ballot and it's like 9 names. And you're like, well, you can see your cousin on it. Like, everyone run it. But it is difficult. And I would say, going through some of the channels Danny and I just explained, checking out city and state, seeing what's their profile, checking out, just typing their name in on Spotify and seeing if any of their names pop up, if they've been on any podcast speaking about, what they want to run on, and, checking out their websites. Websites are caution because it's more so propaganda, putting their best foot forward. But I think it's good to skim because then you can see what, they proclaim their priorities are. So yeah, between checking their website, checking for forums, usually when there's a lot of candidates, some news organization or some media outlet, even someone that's popular on Instagram, they live in a community or do some type of forum to have them all, battle out on some sort of, even playing field where they can, push the ideas forward. It is hard, but you got to put in a little work. It takes time to be engaged, but it is worth it.
Thank you for that, Jibreel. Danny?
Well, I have mixed emotions about ranked what is it, ranked choice voting?
Yeah, ranked choice.
Yeah, I have kind of like mixed emotions because I heard that the purpose of it was specifically to get the 50%, the majority of the percentage of the people that vote, right? So it's like a 50%, like the winner takes 50%. Like Eric Adams, our new mayor, he would take, he took 50% of the majority of the vote, right? But the reason I have an issue with this, right? I like how it like allows more people to run, right? Two issues I have with this, right? One, it makes it more complicated for people that are just getting into the system, right? The people that are just learning how to vote. It kind of like starts to mystify it a little more, right? Making it what kind of decentivizing people to get kind of jump into elections and start voting, right? I could see like that being an issue with specifically explaining it, right? Because I had to read it a couple times before I was like, I kind of fully understand it, right? But I think that's number one, right? I guess number two would be my issue with why, instead of being like, let's get majority of the people that vote, why aren't we making sure that we're putting these funds, right, and these like resources that we have to make sure that voter turnout is higher, right? Instead of being like, let's 27% of the people, let's get 50% of the people, the 27% of the people that voted, right? Because essentially it's still a low turnout. Whichever way you want to look at it, it's still a low turnout. why aren't we putting these resources to make sure that more people coming out to vote, right? More people are registering to vote, more people are making their voice heard, their issues being addressed. Why aren't we pushing on that front, right? So I guess those two issues are like one of the two issues that I have with ranked choice voting, um, specifically, right? The more difficulty and kind of like a way that they cover it up, right? Not cover it up, but obviously I don't think it's like intended with malice, but I do feel that it does complicate a little more when it comes down to making people get civically engaged, right? But then also it I guess we're just looking at the wrong thing, right? I love how it opens up the floor for anybody that wants to run. 9 candidates, perfect, right? But then are we pushing for 9 candidates but still 27% of that turnout? Or should we be pushing for like 50% turnout or 60% turnout or 70% turnout and also 9 candidates, right? Like, why can't we find a solution for both, right? And I guess that's my issue with ranked choice voting. Even that's a mouthful. Like, couldn't they find a better word?
Definitely. All right. If anybody, you guys have nothing else to share, we can, I think Jamise, is your turn, right? For the next question.
Yeah, so Jibreel kind of went over this when he talked about Martin Luther King Jr. So the past generation fought with sacrifice. Do we need to echo their courage to see change? And a supplement of that, what are alternative ways to fight for the things we want to change besides protesting?
Yeah, now those are good questions. Dan, you want me to get this one first? Yeah, I would say, yeah, the premise of that question of, thinking to match, their energy or, their, greatness or however you want to put it, I think it's like, it's not a helpful way to attack an issue. I think, the starting point is, what's wrong in my community? I think you start from there. Of course, read history books is important to, know our history, important to know, who came before us to even get us to the privileges that we have today. Because, face it, we have a lot of privileges that, didn't exist, just even half a century ago. But I would urge folks, instead of, trying to focus on matching, their energy, try to focus on, what the actual issues are. Because I think, comparing yourself to, the greats of history, it may even lead to that analysis paralysis. Like, all right, so how am I going to organize and get hundreds or tens of thousands of people to Washington to march for voting rights? How am I going to, organize a whole nation and try to like end, British colonialism? If you're thinking like about like Gandhi or whatnot, it's just so hard. And, more times than not, those folks, started small. Martin Luther King started as like a pastor and started building up. It's not like, when you read some of their, biggest triumphs, biggest protests, but even those folks, started small, usually started, humble. Even like, our day and age, Barack Obama, started East, or Southside Chicago, organizing, churches and whatnot. He didn't just start and just got up and run for president. I say that all to say, back to my, misconception I think a lot of people have due to the way, history is taught, due to the way activism is taught, is to look at the big picture, look at the, the grand action that you can take to bring about change. And I think that's like a myth about change. So I would just say straight up, no, you don't necessarily have to try to match, some of the folks out in the, in the history books, try to, create the next Black Panther Party or anything like that. Just start off, where you're at, on your block. You can think big. I'm not trying to tell people don't dream big, don't think big. But in terms of the actions you want to take, I would recommend, starting small and building momentum towards that so you can learn, as you go. Other ways you can affect change apart from protesting. So that's that's an interesting question because I view protesting in a lot of different ways. I know most folks when they hear protesting, you get that bullhorn going, get the homies out, put out that call, go and scream your lungs out in the street. But protesting is a lot of ways you can protest. You could protest using your wallet. Just boycotting something is protesting. I'm not gonna buy any more of X or Y or Z product because the owner or the company, does things to exploit people, and I can't support that. I'm not gonna watch X or Y or Z show because the producers or the views that they espouse don't align with me. So there's a lot of just by your attention, just by your money, there's ways you could move to organize and disincentivize things that don't align with you, and then encourage other people to do the same, and expressing why you're taking those actions. Trying to think like a specific things, because the thing about protesting is really just showing that you're disapproving of something and taking action towards it. So it doesn't have to be in the street with that bullhorn. It doesn't have to be painting your face black and going and having your fist in your air in front of like some sort of counter rally or something. It could be, yeah, again, just using your attention and directing it away from something, not necessarily ignoring the issue, but like using the power of the dollar, and even through media. Coming on to a podcast and saying I don't support X or Y because of the following reason, going on social media and starting a hashtag and getting more and more people to like raise awareness around the issue. That's also bringing about change. I would say those two, like not supporting something monetarily or telling other people not to do the same, starve them of resources, or just going on social media to raise awareness on the issue is sometimes powerful, because we even seen during the End SARS movement of like Nigeria, the police brutality that's happening over there. A lot of change came about just by that hashtag going viral and a lot of people learning about it, and then the stars came out and denounced it and all that. So just raising awareness on social media is like another powerful way to bring about change.
Gotcha. I feel like it's important for you to say that, because I think there's some people that downplay the mediaized way of like protesting. Even there was a song of, what was it, Public Enemy #1, don't let the movement be televised or something like that. That was the motto. And so I guess there's this negative connotation with like just using social media to protest, but not actively going outside and being physically there, that people feel like that's where the bread and butter happens. But that's an important point. So thank you for sharing with that. And Danny, you can go.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like honestly, there's different ways where one could be active in a protest, different ways where one could start one, different ways that one could be active in a movement, right? And I think it's also being conscious of one's time, right? In one's life and the circumstances that one's in, right? Not everyone could take a Tuesday off and go march in a protest, right? Not everyone could be like, I'm going to not use this bank anymore, or not everyone could be like, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do the third, so I feel like just starting it off, pushing off initially of just remembering our ancestors did it, or what the history shows us, right, and what others done, right, to give us the rights that we have now, right, that blessed us to have the rights that we have right now. I think one of the biggest parts is you had to start your own movement, right? You had to start your own thing, but don't forget that don't forget the history that brought you up to this point, right? Don't forget what they spoke about. Don't forget what they talked about. Don't forget what they mentioned before. Do the readings, do the research, really structure it, right? Because essentially, we're moving, right? And more issues start to present themselves, more different ways of getting connected, right? Just like Jibreel said, a hashtag, right? Something as simple as a hashtag, right? Something on Twitter, right? Could expand and blow up to be something extremely huge and effectuate so much change, right, in society, in our neighborhoods, and in the world, right? But I feel like it starts off small and then it picks up its pace, right? I also feel like another way to protest would be taking a step back, right, before entering it. I forget who said this, but I forget that it was a philosopher, I think, who used to, before entering a movement or something along those lines, they would stay away from the town. They would stay away from the city in a cabin, and they would stay there for days. And from there, they would kind of like see everything from the outside, right? See everything from a different perspective to see how they would be able to effectuate change the best, right? And I feel like it's important to do that, right? It's important to just take a step back and see what machines are in power here, right? What cycles are moving, right? This isn't the first time that someone fought for this. Like what is the structure? What are the falls? What are the downfalls of the movement, right? I feel like if anyone wants to start a protest, anyone wants to start a movement, I think that the first step would be specifically just, analyzing that history, analyzing the cycles, analyzing the structures, analyzing the machines, analyzing the people of interest in this topic, right? In the conversations and what has been done previously, right? So it's not more of, following the same thing that one did in the past, but starting their own thing, starting small, but just also remembering how to structure, right? um and yeah, I think yeah, I mean, hashtag is huge, stopping one thing, but also understanding your limitations, right, as a person, right? We start seeing all these talks, and I feel like we start seeing all these movements and all these protests and stuff, and I feel like, the structure has changed, right, where it's technology has given us more of a liberty to take a stance from living our own lives, right, within living our own the boundaries that our life gives us, right? And we see it, right? We see it with the people that are attending the protests, right? A majority of them are white people, right? Majority of them are white people, right? You see that, right? And it's because of the structure, right? The structure. I'm not saying that they're not doing a good job, right? But I'm saying you see that, right? You see with the climate change, you see people that are, like Greta, right? Greta, I forget her last name. You see Greta, but you don't see, people of color that are in the movement, that are actually like in the struggle, in the power, in the conflict, right? You don't see people of that are like from the Bronx. You don't see people from Brooklyn. You don't see people that are actually in issues in places where they're being extremely taken advantage of. And I think, now we have the power of social media that allows us to like spread the word around, right, and spread our ability to kind of just like touch upon issues without having to be there, right? So first thing I would say is, use your resources to um, use your resources and take a step back to make sure you know everything that's happening within that movement.
And just to add really quickly on that, while Daniel was speaking, on thought of something else in terms of like taking a step back, is like also changing the world is like good and anyone that, but like also focusing on like issues you may be dealing with yourself, home, you may be perpetrating without even knowing. I would hate for someone to go out there and like try to fight systemic racism, imperialism, global warming, and all that, and they're at home, being abusive or something like that. So I think making sure you unlearn anything that you have through society that's causing harm or anything like that. Like starting with you, I think is sometimes missed in this. And folks are dealing with their own problems, their own biases, XYZ. I think even on the show, one of the topics was like misogyny or something like that. So like, yeah, like that's like an important thing, like just learning, like unlearning things that are put on you through society or through your own experiences. And being and not causing any harm before going out there to save the world, I think is another important component of it.
That is definitely an important point. I mean, you can't change the world if you can't change yourself to begin with. So thank you for sharing. And with that, we can move to the next question, which is like an outlook. Hillary Clinton, a reflection that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but lost the election. How do we continue to convince people that our votes are meaningful? And supplementary, does the public have any way to influence? Does the public have any influence over the Electoral College?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep this one short because I feel like that's such a like that question is just so wild to me. It's like, damn, that is true. Like she lost the, I don't know who came up with that question. That was you, Ahmed?
Yeah, that was me.
That's a crazy question, bro. What? But yeah, that could be, demoralizing, especially given, who won as a result of that loss. And like, I think it happened like 2 times or 3 times in the last like 2 decades. I think that was the same thing with Al Gore and Bush or whatever. So it's like, when I hear that, that's just like, that even like, dumbfounds me. Like when somebody bring that up, I'm just like, yeah, that was a problem. So, but that's a systemic issue. So that right there, voting is important and all that, but like, kind of like, I think the goal sometimes for me even is like to move folks even past, the goal of being an engaged citizen and voting and whatnot, to like movement building, like, trying to change the systems that we have in place. Our system is rooted in, white supremacy. Let's just be real. And like trying to raise people consciousness to try and dismantle that, to even move past the act of voting. I think it's like so important, because that gets at, the point of like Hillary, winning the popular vote but losing through the electoral college. Is like, that's just a systemic issue. That's not like, you can't, blame your homie for not voting on the block. That's just like based in, a constitution that's, founded by, partly some like white supremacist folks to just be, real and whatnot, and just to keep, that power. So like, my answer there is like, we got to get folks, this is important. We got to, get, you can't climb a mountain if you can't, get to the mountain. So yes, we have to get people to register to vote, to get to start voting. But I try to tell people that are involved, like, that's like like one of the first steps for me. Like, that's like, level one. Like, there's so much other stuff that you could be doing, to try to change the system. And that's like only through movement building and really going at the root systemic issues, that are prevalent in our society. We don't have any, as like citizen direct control over electoral college. That has to like be changed through an act of Congress. But that's only like through movement building. So to have Congress like do anything of that, stature, you need to get a movement going behind it. And, we both know that electoral college is not really sexy. Like, to get a mass movement to say, change the electoral college, like, that's so far down the line. But I think like, just going at, systemic racism, going at imperialism, going at like, global warming and whatnot, and then circling back and say, hey, one of the things that's stopping us from achieving all this big, systemic change is the electoral college. I think that would be a better way of going at it than trying to convince folks to get involved to try to, change the electoral college. So number one, I would just say we need to get people to think on a higher conscious level of like trying to go at systemic inequities to try to fix our electoral system as a whole.
Definitely. Thank you for answering that. I apologize for the the difficulty of the question. I just wanted to
Wow,
see.
I was like, I guess
Just had to see where the thinking has to be made. But go ahead, Danny.
100%, I agree. The electoral college is not going anywhere. That is a whole like constitutional thing, and it would open the door for like a lot of change within the Constitution. I wouldn't want to even look down that road just to see what people would try to amend in the Constitution. It would be like a whole like, I think Congress would have to vote in a constitution. Like, they would have to like go into like an, I guess, like reconstruction of the Constitution, where anything in Constitution is say, anything is in good play. And that just sounds like a nightmare. I honestly just sounds like horrible. That's like taking like 20, like take one step back, but then take like a whole train back, but I feel like with Hillary, we saw with the Hillary race, right? And even this was in this race recently, right? It really comes down to local level, right? People always like, yeah, I vote for the president all the time. Yeah. I vote, but it's like, are you voting for like your senator? Are you also voting for, are you getting people out to vote for your senator? Are you getting people out to vote for your state senator? Are you getting people out to vote for your state and for your mayoral, right? Like, are people going out and people registered in your district specifically? Hillary won specifically in areas of like, that were known predominantly to be Democratic, specifically in areas that were cities, right? She won city areas, right? Trump won in the areas that were a little more rural, right? Areas that were a little more, I don't know if rural is the right word, but areas that were more like not city, right? Anything that you don't consider a city, like that's where he won, right? But I think it really goes down to that. And we saw in this recent election, right, that if it wasn't for states like Georgia, it wasn't for states like Pennsylvania, it wasn't for states like Michigan that got out the vote, right? Went to areas that where people were being pushed, and there were laws specifically targeted for people not to be able to vote, right? They're being pushed, right? And now there was awareness in those areas, and we're like, hey, look, now let's go to these areas that are ignored essentially, right? And are always like, we vote for this, we vote for that, but we don't vote in the specific, in the smaller, in the local level, right? And I think it really comes down to, are we making sure that people register vote, not only in the cities, right? Cities are beautiful, right? But yeah, everyone's registered vote, but are we also going out to the more suburban areas, right? Like Long Island, are we going out to the areas like I guess like what is it, like North, like New York, like Upper New York, I guess, like Orange County and like Westchester and stuff. Like, are we pushing up? Annie would be perfect to talk about this, but like, are we like pushing up to those areas, right? Of areas where are technically like they have a completely different system, right? Are we pushing people to get registered to vote there, right? And not specifically in New York, but in specific areas that have history of blocking people the right to vote, right? Are we checking there? Are we looking there, right? And I think with Stacey Adams, what she did in Georgia was beautiful. What other elected officials done. How we were able to flip seats in Congress. That's like a local change, and that's a small change, but it's a small change to the right direction, and that would avoid us from facing another Hillary v. Donald Trump, right? Eventually, it goes down to electoral college, right? But again, I'm not 100% sure about this, but a majority of the electoral college, they are voted in. They are states committeesmen, right? Or they are people that are in higher positions of power right now. So like, I believe it's like a delegate. Like New York has their own delegation of like electoral college voters, and every state has their own, right? But if we're able to tackle on the local, right, and make sure people are ready and registered to vote, then we'll see an effect eventually I hate to use the word eventually, right? Because I feel like people say eventually things are never going to happen, but like we'll see change, right? We'll see change going up and up and up and up and up the ladder, right? So we saw in this election done correctly. We didn't see it in Hillary's election done correctly. Hillary was just around the cities, right? Katy Perry came to Pennsylvania. I don't know, Maroon 5 came to New York. Great, but Trump's holding these like huge rallies in these other areas, like these whole areas that are forgotten completely, right? I think now is the time to forgetting them, forget being like, this is not my area, I'm not going to go there, but saying, let's open it up, right? Let's push to these different areas that we've known have history of being pushed around, and now we're there, and we're registering people to vote, right, and to be active in civically.
Thank you for sharing, Danny. Jibreel, you look like you have something extra to say.
No, not really. Just thinking about just how far we have to go and how much work we have to do. I'm just already thinking about like, man.
No worries.
I gotta get back
apologize
out.
for the trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. Gemise, you got the next question?
Yes. So there have been reports about booth translators being tied to political parties. Are non-English speaking voters susceptible to unwarranted influence?
Booth translators?
That's Danny, if you want. Danny gave feedback and shot it this way.
Danny gave some feedback.
Oh, so
you can take that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Look, if all these different like website and organizations are providing services for people that are engaged voters, right? And we don't have the hey Annie, they don't have the language accessibility, right? That we want to have. How many languages are in Queens, specifically in Queens? More than, I don't exactly know the number, but a lot, right? It's not only English, Spanish, and French. It's a lot of languages, right? Are we getting to them, right? Are we going to provide information for them to make a decision based on their views, right? Or based on where they stand politically, right? I feel like, this was an issue before, right? With people that were volunteering for elections, right? And they would persuade other people to vote. Of course, the Board of Elections has them trained and stuff accordingly to prevent issues like this. But if we aren't pushing, right? Again, this again goes again to the accessibility of voting, right? If we aren't pushing, right, for more language accessibility, more ways to vote, more accessibility overall in the world of voting, right? Specifically language, then we're just opening up a layer for them people to be persuaded, right? And not specifically vote for what they believe in, but specifically vote for what someone is telling them, what someone's promising them, what they spoke my language, this or that or the third, you know? So as long as we're not opening up that window of, hey, look, we have all the languages available, right? Or we have a majority of the languages available. Or if we don't have the majority of the language, we have people that are trained, right, to discuss different modes of voting, discuss how to vote, discuss how to register to vote, then we're just opening up a hole to that people could get taken advantage and not really fulfill their right. They're going to be voting, yeah, but are they voting specifically because they believe in that? No, they might not, you know? So as long as we don't address that issue, I feel like it would become an issue that will continue to allow to get more people, if they have in the future, to get taken advantage of.
Gotcha. Okay. Wait, Jibreel, do you have anything to add to Danny's comments, or?
Yeah, no, 100%. I do some organizing for the African immigrant communities, and I do feel there is a high opportunity for corrupt forces to come in and try to co-opt their voices and not have their views rightly represented. But I think in terms of like voting and whatnot, I think especially speaking about from my personal experience trying to organize different African immigrant communities, I think getting them the help that they deserve. Like the politics is part and parcel from the work that we have to actually do to make sure they're supported and they can access government resources. There's so many languages that folks immigrate to this state, to this country too, that they can't use to converse with the government. I think that's just a problem. So I think the voting and the civic engagement piece of it is important, but I think specifically for the communities that are organized around, the African immigrant communities that are organized around, there's a whole different conversation in terms of getting them the support that they deserve from government before we even get to voting and whatnot. I still try to explain to them it's important to get engaged, to get voted and whatnot, but they're trying to they're dealing with food insecurity, they're dealing with eviction. There's just so much stuff that they're dealing with that they don't want to hear about no polling booth or anything like that. So that's what I have to say there about folks who don't speak English as a first language in terms of getting involved.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jibreel. Annie, welcome to the episode.
Time.
Okay. So the first question that we asked the people was, how do you guys feel when people say voting is pointless or meaningless?
Well, first and foremost, I understand. Right. I get it. I get how people feel like their vote doesn't matter. I get it. Because like history has shown us that sometimes your vote doesn't matter. But I just put this question out to you. So why do people fight so hard to make voting difficult, right? Taking away people's voting rights. We're talking about like black codes, poll tax, grandpa clauses, like all these things to prevent people from voting for so long. Like if it wasn't important, people wouldn't be like trying to take away your vote for like throughout history, right? Throughout history. So that's how there's some level of importance to voting, because they wouldn't work so hard to make sure that you can't vote. But yes, your vote counts. I know individually it doesn't seem like it counts, but as a collective, it definitely counts. Like who you elect into office has an impact on your everyday life. Everyday life. I'm talking about from like the clothes you wear, the amount of broadband you have accessible to you, the cars you're driving, because that's going to change soon. Every aspect like you can think of has like a connection to who's elected into office. Like every aspect of your life, even the nuances stuff like that you don't think about. Yeah, like policy, I can say this is like one of the most important things in your life. Yeah. If you guys have any feedback.
No.
Okay, but
You guys have anything else to
really
add?
passionate about this. I am. Like,
Hot, coming in hot.
Yeah.
and
And so,
as
oh,
POCs and Black people and Black
Yeah.
women, like I don't have the option not to get political and not to
Yeah.
think about policy and not to think about how policy impacts us and how our vote impacts us.
definitely.
So every single aspect to how I can wear my hair,
Mhm.
like you don't think about it, but like literally how we wear our hair in the workforce
Okay.
is linked to policies that were passed. Like, so every aspect that you can, like, I feel like this is like a question coming up of like what we can do.
Yeah.
I wish in high school I learned how important policy really is on our everyday lives. And not even thinking about like federally, like the local stuff, the local stuff too. And I feel like in high school, if we would have learned how much policy has an impact on us, we would have ran to the voting polls, right? Right? I know like we couldn't vote back then, but policy has been passed to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote. And I'm hoping that automatic voting just goes through also, where people don't even have to register to vote. Like you're just automatically be a register to vote. Like you don't have to like sign a paper, blah, blah. And I hope that goes through. Vote on it, guys. When it comes through next year on elections, like please vote on it.
Definitely remind us.
I can do that. But I wish in high school we actually learned how important it was. And also like how to vote, right? Like I didn't learn about this in high school. I don't know if you guys had a different experience, but I went to a New York City public high school in Queens. Shout out to Queens. But we didn't really learn about like the voting process. Like we learned about like the generic overview of it. Like we learned about electoral colleges, yeah, of course, but we didn't learn about like local elections, how to register to vote. I didn't learn that. What I should be looking for when I'm picking a candidate to vote for. Like we didn't learn any of that in my high school. No, what we learned was just history. History is important, don't get me wrong, but I also would like to know like what I should look out for in the future, right? What directly impacts my life now too. So suggestions, learning about it in high school, like learn about it in school.
Definitely.
Right.
All right. You had a lot to say for that first question, so thankfully we can get you up to speed. So right now, second to last question, legislation passed in Long Island that encourages police officers to sue individuals who harass them because of their profession. This will evidently affect protesters who actively defy the violent authority of police. Is this a sign of how government will attempt to silence the public in terms of like voting? That's a thinker.
Yeah, you want
Jibreel?
to jump for that one first? Or I need more space. I got a lot of heat coming.
Can you repeat the second part of that question?
Oh, the second part is just, is this a sign of how the government will attempt to silence the public?
Or Jibreel, you can take it away.
Yeah, I can start off. I feel like, so the thing about that question, I feel like the scope is a bit wide towards the end, because that's like one area, one county and whatnot. It's not that it should be ignored. Definitely got to take that serious if laws like that are passed. And I don't think the executive in that county actually signed it through. I think it's just sitting on their table. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just trying to say that one example, I think it's farther away from the general consensus. Of course, police brutality or anything like that should be taken with like utmost seriousness, and there shouldn't be any type of laws that kind of like kind of chill folks' First Amendment rights to come out and voice their opinions. Of course, we don't want to have folks being hurt or quote unquote, I don't know, harass. I don't buy the harassment piece of it, but we don't want like officers and whatnot being physically hurt or whatnot. Uh, I'm assuming like that part, and there are parts of New York that are more conservative, more for lack of a better term, cop friendly, and I think that's where that is stemming from. They love to support the men and women in uniform and all that. I think that's where it's coming from. And less so from, I think, like any serious effort at necessarily protecting those folks. I think it is to really deter folks from coming out and exercising their rights and voicing their anger with the system, or their discomfort, or their disagreement with the system. In terms of saying this is a way government is being or a tool government can use to like kind of stop folks from protesting, I don't think like stuff like that will fly in most areas. So like government as a whole, I don't see that as being a law that any legislature, especially NYC, will have any appetite to even propose, because we'll get them right out of here ASAP if they try to pull some stuff like that. So I think that's more like the cop friendly. I support the men and women in uniform areas, part of New York, part of the country. And those areas, there are less protests in general usually, and I think they were just reacting of what happened over the summer with George Floyd and whatnot, and try to use that to even, like I said, remember we had the question of what do politicians consider when passing policy and legislation. I think if it's an election, I was assuming that may have been passed an election year to make them seem like they're tough on crime, or they support the folks, the men and women, as opposed to like any serious policy effort at protecting those people. And I think I'll leave it there, leave space for Danny and Annie.
Thank you very much. Danny, Annie, anybody first?
So that bill, so like again, it goes back to Nassau County is very different than New York City, very different than New York City, and they're just like very different communities and very different ideologies that go around there. But it really shows the importance of starting off local, right, and making sure we're engaging people locally, right. So the person who presented this bill, right, was voted in, right, and we had to like get to that fact first, right. They were voted in by a group of people, right. I don't exactly know what the turnout in that district was. I don't know who voted, when they voted, when the election was. I don't know who the person that passed the bill, who presented the bill is, right. But we need to see how this is like kind of like the scary power that local power has, other than a federal power, right. That a bill of this category would be presented, right, in its idea that it will be presented as a law and they'll write it down. So the executive, Nassau County executive, I think Laura Karan, she vetoed the bill, so it's not, it's the bill is dead essentially. But it just shows you how scary, right, and how when this first came out, everyone was going all around social media. There was calling campaigns, there was mailing campaigns, there was like let me get in your face campaign, like let's hit the streets campaign. They were militarizing, they were just out there, they were ready to go. And it just shows you how crazy when people push themselves, how elected officials will respond, right, how elected officials recognize I work for the voters, I work for the people that are there, or the people that are pushing me, right. And I guess like it goes back to like really like recognizing the power that we have, right, to stop bills like this being even presented, right, because this should have a space anywhere, right. Because it shouldn't be presented anywhere, so I feel like this really speaks to, I don't know, again, the second part of the question, is it really going to stop, as if we're not pushing people and pushing communities to be civically engaged, then we are allowing elected officials to run with whatever they want to run with, right. And I guess the question opens up, if we are not being able to kind of spread the word and get people registered to vote, we ourselves are allowing people to take decisions for us. We're allowing them to put the structures in place. We're giving them that permission, right? If we're like, we're not going to vote, right? And I think it brings down to, again, like the power that we have and we hold in our hands, it's specifically on that, specifically on going to areas that people never go to, right? New York, yeah, New York City's protected. New York City's like, but very, 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 very protected. Very protected. I'm talking about like this district in Texas. I'm talking about a district in Michigan, right? I'm talking about a district in Pennsylvania, right? Not like Philadelphia. I'm talking about, I don't know, Harrisburg, right? Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, right? What's happening there? Who are the electeds there? Where are the voting booths there? Like those areas, right? Specific areas that are not really paid much attention to. What's happening there, right? Because imagine if New York City has voting turnout for 27%. I can't imagine how the voting turnout in those areas are.
Thank you very much, Danny. That's a powerful answer you had there, Andy.
I had to agree with both the gentlemen on the panel, of course, right? I like this question because I think we're so used to being in like this New York City bubble and this blue bubble, but like I grew up less than an hour away from Nassau County, like in Queens. So Nassau is it's pretty close to where I grew up from. Like its hair is like I think like we always think like New York is blue. New York is blue. We don't have laws and bills to like discriminate against other people or protesters, or we're so liberal. We're so liberal. But in reality, if you cut out like New York City and a couple upstate counties, we're not that blue. So I like this question a lot. Other note, I don't believe in harassment in any kind. It's okay. And any kind for a public servant. And I get that, but like this bill is targeting just the protesters. Like we know who they're targeting, protesters for Black Lives Matter and who are against police brutality. And it's a difference between protesting and harassment. Is a clear line for that. It's a clear line for that. And there are already laws and bills in place if you harass or abuse or offend an officer, you're
That's 10 to 25 in federal
prison. Right. And in reality, like public servants have that protection. Well, some, because I don't have that protection as a public servant because I was appointed, but still, I don't have that. And I'm sure like Danny and Jibreel have worked in offices and I've gotten like heat from people before, like, but like, I'm not protected under that law, not at all. Like, if you harass me, you're getting the sentence like all civilians. But if you harass like someone from like NYPD or a police officer, best to believe like you're getting a heftier, punishment, whatever. But they have protections already in place. They do. Now, protesters, do they have protections in place when police harass them? Not really. Not really. So also just putting it out there because I've been reading up, there has been like elected officials that wanted to, like if you harass a police officer or abuse a police officer, they wanted to charge it as a hate crime. Like it's out there. So in New York State, you want to say like, we think we're all blue. No, like they want to charge it as a hate crime. So, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
The second part, let me see here. Like, is this a sign of how government or the powers that be will attempt to silence the public?
I do think it was like an attempt because it was clearly a target on who they wanted to keep down, the protesters. So I'm not going to say government because keep in mind it is Nassau County and it's a local bill that was not passed. Well, it passed, but not signed, thank God. But I think it's just so important to like keep informed, right? Just current events, like because I get this a lot. If you watch the news and you have an issue of like what was passed, call your elected official, write your elected official, show up. I know COVID protocols, but like show up. Like if there's something that upsets you so much, because let me tell you, people do it like on the other side. What I mean, like the other side, like about this bill. I'm pretty sure that there was people for this bill that contacted their elected officials and were like, "We want this passed."
Definitely.
Right. But on the other side, the sometimes it's quiet, like because a lot of people don't know. And I get it. We work, we're busy, but like keep informed. We'll try to. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that, Annie. And now we move on to the last question, which will be given to us by Gemise.
Like, why you say it like that? So our very last question, are we in danger of having our right to vote stripped away? So nice, simple thought process. Are we in danger right now in this moment? Are we in danger of having our right to vote stripped away?
Constantly. Constantly. Do you mind me going first? Good.
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. Go ahead.
Constantly. Like, have you heard about like what's happening in Georgia? Like little even policies like you're not allowed to like feed people on the polling line or give them water on a polling line, even if you're nonpartisan. Like little tactics like that can stop people from voting easily. I'm like, I don't want to stand on this line and get dehydrated. Like, like little tactics like that, like, yes, like your vote is always in jeopardy, or your right to vote is always, it can always be in jeopardy. So that's why it's super important to be civically engaged. Even when you don't, I know you don't have time, and I get it, but reach out to the folks that do have time. Like if you can't ask that question, make sure you have a friend that can ask that question for you, or you have advocates in the community like Jibreel and Danny that are going out and doing the field work to fight on your behalf.
Definitely. Who wants to go next?
Dan, you want to take it?
Yeah. So, I think it goes down to like, again, it all circles, right? It circles, back to how important the local level is, right? And now I'm moving away from like, mayor, council members and stuff like that. And I'm moving to judges, right? How important judges are and how much of a role a majority of them are elected, right? And how a majority of them run campaigns. But during election season, we only see one judge. We see two judges. We don't know their name. I don't even know their name. I know they're on the ballot. I know they're a Democrat or whatever party they're affiliating with. That's about it, right? And I guess it's so important to now look into those, because when it comes down to like legal challenges and stuff like that, it really brings down to who's representing the case and who's the judge hearing that law, if it's unconstitutional or not constitutional, right? Now, if it's a problem of if it's constitutional or not, it would go up to the Supreme Court, right? And that again goes to your civic duty of the president, right? Making sure you're voting for the president, making sure you're voting, but it also goes down to local issues, right? Local cases, because that marks president that that affiliates every hearing and every holding that eventually comes out. But there's going to be different ways that people try to mystify it, right? I think the best way to get rid of people's voting rights, right, or these challenging them is to mystify it. If people don't understand it, they're not going to do it. If it's too hard, they're not going to do it. I don't blame them, because I have a lot of things to do too. So like if you're telling me that I have to do this and that and the third and the fourth, and then also I'm not going to have water or food on the line when I'm waiting, right? I'm not going to do it. Like it's more barriers for one to actually be able to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, right? And I feel like if people aren't being civically engaged, we're allowing elected officials to run in and present these bills, present these laws, and present these new forms of like policy or projects they're trying to start, right? And they'll always give you like a weird answer. You're like, oh yeah, it's not, because like the water bottle that they give you can have like elected official's name under the cap, or gonna have like it could be all blue colored water or something, or red colored waters. I don't know, but they'll give you an answer to try to like sway you to be like, oh yeah, I guess that's a good law. It's not a good law. But it comes down to, are you being civilly engaged to start, right? And I guess like there'll always be those barriers, like we've seen in history, right? With the tests, with the taxes, with all that kind of stuff. Now we see in the present with language accessibility. We see it with different laws that are being presented. We see it with different closing election booths, election areas being closed down, churches, senior centers, stuff like religious institutions, schools, right? They're being closed. Oh, this is not a polling site anymore. You got to go 20 blocks down. There's your new polling site. For a senior, that just limits them, right? For me, I'm like, all right, maybe I could drive down 20 blocks, right? For somebody else, they might not be able to. They might not have the time. They might be a crazy line because now that polling area has two districts or has more people coming to that area. There's more line, right? There's people with less time, right? There's circumstances in life where people try to enter or try to be civilly engaged, right? But again, it goes knowing your limitations, right? And I feel like if you're not civilly engaged in the beginning, you're allowing people to present these barriers so that these polling sites could eventually close, so that these barriers open up, right? And the only way we could stop it is by being civically engaged, getting involved in the local level, right? Voting for all of them, knowing everybody's name, right? Not everyone, but people that you kind of like affiliate with or like are a little bit closer with, right? So if is our right to vote getting taken away? I believe if we continue on the route that we're going on, I believe that yeah, it could eventually be not taken away, but there could be so many barriers that it might not even be a right to vote anymore, right? It might not even be as easy to vote as oh, let me go on my phone and vote, but it might be very difficult to vote, and that'll just decrease the numbers even more, and it will give a lesser responsibility for elected official to be held to a specific standard.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Just quick, I know we got 2 minutes, 1 minute. I agree with both Danny and Annie.
Yeah.
At the inception of this country, none of us would have had the right to vote. It was just like only, landowning white men. And then, had to fight, struggle, civil war, all that to even get, folks of color to vote, to even get women to vote. So if we don't continue to engage, that right can be taken away. I would stay straight up. Folks' rights are being taken away even today. You get convicted or accused of a crime or wrongdoing, you get disenfranchised, and you know who that affects disproportionately. So we still live in a racist white supremacist system, and our right to vote will get taken away if we sleep at the wheel. So we gotta continue to stay engaged, continue to vote, continue to get folks engaged.
All right. Thank you for that. With that, that's the last question of the day. Thank you very much for Annie for coming in late, but you did share. We did get some of your energy. Hopefully that rubbed off to the audience. Unfortunately, Gemise had to go. She had a therapy session to attend to at 2:00. But I just want to end the podcast off. If you guys would like to give me feedback, I can write down notes. You can stay a little bit after the podcast. If you have to go, you can go. And to the audience, thank you very much for listening to season 2, episode 1. Voting is meaningless. And I'm going to end the recording right now. See you until the next episode.